Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Hawaii Book and Music Festival webinar on Hawaii Action Plans, Green Model for the Planet. I think we have everybody in from the waiting room. So let's start. I see the numbers stabilizing, so let's start. I'm McKenna Kaufman. I'm with the University of Hawaii at Manoa. I'm the director for the Institute for Sustainability and Resilience, as well as a professor of urban and regional planning. Today, we're talking about climate action. So how do we actually meet the challenge of the climate crisis by reducing greenhouse gas emissions that are the cause of global climate change? So Hawaii has really ambitious goals in this space, and it's to have net negative greenhouse gas emissions no later than 2045. So this means that we would actually sequester more greenhouse gas emissions annually than we produce. This goal is very much in line with what climate science calls for in terms of stabilizing the warming trend from pre-industrial levels to between 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. And just, for context, the globe is already over 1 degree warmer than on average. So this is the kind of action that has to be taken across the globe in order to meet this goal. We're going to delve into different aspects of climate action, really going from global to local issues with our three excellent speakers, Celeste Connors, Anu Hittel, and Matt Gonzer. Celeste is the executive director of Hawaii Green Growth and the Hawaii Local 2030 Hub. She has 20 years of experience working at the intersection of economic, environment, and international development policy. She previously served as the director for environment and climate change at the National Security Council and National Economic Council at the White House. She's currently a senior adjunct fellow at the East-West Center and a director on the Hawaiian Electric Industries Board. Anu Hittel staffs the state government of Hawaii's Climate Change Mitigation and Adaptation Commission. She's also an adjunct fellow at the East-West Center. Before coming to Hawaii, she was a climate change researcher in Washington, D.C. with the World Resources Institute, an activist at Greenpeace, and an instructor at Washington University in St. Louis, where she taught and co-led the research institution's observer delegation for the Conference of Parties 2020, 21, and 22. And we'll talk more about Conference of Parties, or COP for short. Anu shared with me this quote by Aldo Leopold, that there are some who can't live without wild things, and there's some who can live without wild things, and some who cannot. Anu says that she is someone who cannot. Matt Gonzer serves as the City and County of Honolulu's Chief Resilience Officer and Executive Director of the city's Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency. He joined the city in the Resilience Office in October 2017 and previously served as the Coastal and Water Program Manager. I also had the privilege of working with Matt when he was an extension agent at the University of Hawaii Sea Grant Program. So I'm very happy to introduce our three speakers. Before we get into this conversation, just as a matter of housekeeping, for those of you on the webinar, please put your questions for the Q&A section into the Q&A portion of the Zoom rather than the chat box. It's just easier to have everything in one place. So after the conversations, we'll get to Q&A, and I'll hopefully be able to field some of your questions. With this, I will turn it over to our great speakers. We are going to start with the global and move to local issues and then go back again. So I'll turn it over to Celeste, who also has a video to share from Nainoa Thompson in order to frame some of this. So Celeste?
Mahalo, McKenna, and it's such a pleasure to be on this panel with you and Anu and Matt, and also to be partnering with the Hawaii Book and Music Festival. It's really an exciting time, and I'm also delighted to be able to participate as an observer in many of these panel discussions. But yes, before we kick it off, it's my pleasure to show a video with one of our partners, Nainoa Thompson, who heads up Polynesian Voyaging Society, with whom we have an MOU. So let me hand it over to our team to share that video now. Thank you.
Aloha mai kako. My name is Nainoa Thompson, and I'm very honored to participate in this really special celebration. I apologize. I'm in another part of the world. I'm in a place called Marae Moana. It's the second largest marine ocean park in the world. Trying to find solutions to help with building capacity to take care of that huge open space. One of my very best friends, Keikioka Aina, son of Hawaii, astronaut, Lieutenant Colonel Lacey Veach, who was the one who planted the seed of the idea for the worldwide voyage in 1992. That he would say things to me like, "Hey, Nainoa, you have no idea how beautiful your island Earth is until you see the whole thing from space. But it's the only island we got that harbors so much water and life." And he said, "But we're changing it, and it's changing us, and we don't really know what to do." And he said that you can't protect what you don't understand, and you won't if you don't care, and you can't do it by yourself. Sail Hokulea around the world and discover and find is humanity still kind enough to make the changes it needs to make, and can you build a network of people of common vision and values going to the same destination? What's more dangerous, the pirate, the hurricane, the rogue wave of South Africa, the mosquito, the disease and violence on the earth, or is it more dangerous to be tied to the dock and be knowledgeable but don't go? 37 months, 42,000 miles, 18 countries, but 327 ports, looking for kindness, looking for solution, looking for those on the earth, the great navigators on the earth who are making changes that we need, but with all humility. The place that I believe, with all humility, that is really the place of navigators is Hawaii. We're starting on a whole new voyage that's really built on the vision of Lacey Veach, this meeting where we come together to celebrate the hub, the localized partnership that was asked by the United Nations for Hawaii to be designated as one of the first hubs in the world. There's a reason for that. You want to see and feel the issues of climate change or finding solutions to sustainability, do it on islands. And the heritage of this ancestry of Native people here, that the science is there, everything's there. It's a matter of just doing it. So Hawaii becomes this hub of great ancestry, great indigenous knowledge, tested over 1,000 years, multiplied against the power of our science and technology, and multiplied it. What Lacey said, the most important value of Hawaii to become the navigator and the school for the earth is that its culture is still kind, that diversity matters, that we celebrate every single one of us. And he said, here's the place. Hawaii is a laboratory and Hawaii is a school. The United Nations designated Hawaii as one of the first hubs, a localized hub, because the United Nations recognizes that it will not be able to meet its 17 strategic goals without local participation. And I'm just honored that Hawaii would be designated as one of the first. The purpose of the hub is really the island that we seek. It's the global island that we seek that's going to be a place where we're healthy. It's a place that we're clean, a place that's peaceful. And the sail plan for the hub here in Hawaii has really been mapped out already by the Aloha Plus Challenge. It's there. The sail plan that heads us to better leadership decisions, better policies, and a way to allow community to be a part of something extraordinarily special in their own homeland. The vehicle that carries us is, in my opinion, is Hawaii Green Growth. It's the va'a, it's the voyaging canoe. It's the platform that carries all of us in a common path to a common destination, which is required to meet the challenge that we need to meet today. And then I think the crew of this extraordinary voyage is really, it's really the values that are deeply embedded in the Malama Mandate. In the Malama Mandate, everything in there helps us find out why our lives are important and why we can participate in something extraordinarily special. Every single one of us. I love it. I love the sail plan. The only question I'm asking the room that we need is, who's the navigator? Who's going to navigate this? And to me, it's where I go back to Lacey, where he said, Hawaii needs to become the school for the earth. Hawaii should be a place where we come together and invest in our young people, believe in our young people, give them opportunity, give them hope, keep them home. and help train them to be the navigators in their generation that we couldn't find in ours because we weren't trained. We weren't trained. Our schools weren't designed that way. So I am just mildly, softly pushing that we bring education into the fold at a very, very strong priority and an investment by our schools in Hawaii and our universities to be a place where the world will know if you want to find a navigator, go to Hawaii. And with that, I wish you all the best. I want to thank Hawaii Green Growth for their extraordinary leadership and navigation, and thank everybody for being here on this most important day. And I do it not just on behalf of Lacey Veach, but I do it for those who are not here that struggled a lifetime like Kenny Brown or Pinky Thompson and others who are not here that need to be brought into the room and celebrated. So thank you very much.
Well, I'd like to thank Nainoa, who shared his thoughts on the anniversary of celebrating the recognition of Hawaii by the United Nations as a local 2030 hub, a sustainability center of excellence. And I think what he is sharing is actually so extraordinary, and really to reflect on this, it's really about Hawaii becoming that starlight, that Hawaii is leading the world on environmental issues despite the challenges we confront every day, and really using this legacy of Hawaiian indigenous wisdom that goes back centuries. And this has really captured the imagination of the world at a time when many regard the Earth as being at a dangerous crossroads. And to go back, McKenna, to something that you said earlier, it's looking at the 1.5 and 2 degrees and the Paris Agreement as we are collectively preparing for the COP, and the IPCC report that really says that we need massive behavior change across every sector of our society to avoid the most catastrophic impacts of climate change. But in the report, it also points to the importance of local communities and indigenous knowledge and wisdom. And further, it points to the Sustainable Development Goals, these goals that all member nations of the United Nations agreed to in 2015 during this decade of action. So it's I'm delighted to be able to speak to this a little bit today. And I'll share some slides, if we could do that now. And as we're pulling up the slides, just a bit of background on Hawaii Green Growth. We're a public-private partnership, actually this year celebrating our 10-year anniversary. And Hawaii Green Growth was actually launched at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation meeting that was hosted in Honolulu in 2011. The previous slide really shows it is a diverse group of partners. The logos of my colleagues here on the panel, our state, our city, our counties, private sector, civil society. It's just a snapshot here of the partners. But going back to the origins, launched in 2011, and what it was really a response to the 2008 financial crisis and the commitment that leaders made, actually, that we needed to have a green growth recovery in order to emerge better from that crisis. But here we are a decade later, facing new challenges, a global pandemic and climate change, which is the greatest challenge of our time. And so we still need to go back to the framing of a green growth recovery, economic, social, and environmental pillars, which is the new political framework as far as I'm concerned. And then the Aloha Plus Challenge is Hawaii's own framework for the UN SDGs. As I mentioned, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, as colleagues on the panel will know, were launched in 2015. But this was actually predated by the Aloha Plus Challenge, which was Hawaii's own locally and culturally appropriate response to sustainability. And it involved a joint leadership commitment by the state, counties, and the legislature, with a network of business and civil society and community partners coming together around one central vision and hub. And together they developed these 6 goals to be achieved by the year 2030, which cut across education and green workforce. This here, if I can say, is premised, or the origins of the group of the Aloha Plus Challenge goals are actually built on the Ahupua'a model. And this highlights this history of systems thinking and a long legacy of sustainability. And it actually forms the foundation of the Aloha Plus Challenge. Many of you might be familiar with this proverb. Heva'a he moku, he moku heva'a. The canoe is an island and the island is a canoe, which highlights the finite resources of our shared canoe, an island Earth. And so we're really benefiting, Hawaii is, from over 1,000 years of systems thinking, even as this seems to come as a revelation to the international community. So because of this work and this collective public and private and community-driven action 2 years ago as part of the Local 2030 initiative launched by the Secretary General of the United Nations, Hawaii was recognized as a Local 2030 hub tasked with scaling Hawaii's sustainability model in a locally and culturally appropriate way to other island economies. And that's the work that we're undertaking right now with the Secretariat housed in Honolulu at the East-West Center. And this is in response to this recognition, the Secretariat launched a network of partners including Micronesia, Marshall Islands, Curacao, Grenada, Bonaire, Guam, and Ireland, identifying itself as an island economy as a founding partner. And this co-secretariat is jointly managed with the Global Island Partnership, GLISPA. So this network will serve as a central resource for island-led solutions, helping communities achieve net zero commitments and adapt to inevitable impacts of climate change. We believe this is a collective challenge that needs collective action. So we're committed to working with our neighbors, local, regional, and international. And during the pandemic, we didn't stop the convening. We actually launched a virtual platform for islands to connect with each other during this difficult time of disruption, including supply chain disruption, convening on topics like regenerative tourism and island resilience and economic recovery, food security, data, and innovation. So what actually happened during the U.S. Hosted Climate Summit recently in April, U.S. Special Envoy for Climate Change, John Kerry, announced the United States would be supporting the Local 2030 Islands Network during an event. And actually this would be supported by the U.S. Department of State and NOAA to support islands in integrating climate data and information, as well as the National Renewable Energy Lab, NREL, building on their low emissions development strategies. So essentially what Special Envoy Kerry was saying is that for the United States to put its best foot forward in the climate arena is to actually put its own islands forward, putting Hawaii and Guam and Puerto Rico at the forefront. So part of this commitment is we're looking to help other island economies develop a dashboard similar to the Aloha Plus dashboard, which actually has now captured over 6 years of data. These metrics and indicators were actually co-developed by the community over 4 years of convening, and there is an ongoing quarterly iterative process to continue to measure what matters most to our community. And so this work is also supported by our state and our county. And so additionally, we are now working, as I mentioned, with other island economies to develop their own dashboards. And I'm delighted to note that Guam just launched the Guam Green Growth and their dashboard. So through this network, we're convening partners throughout the year. It also captures data from our private sector, civil society, government data I mentioned. I'll just continue to work through my slides just very quickly because I want to hear from our colleagues. But we are going to actually be putting a spotlight on our the Climate One Oahu Action Plan, and we'll look forward to hearing more from Matt on that. One thing we did do last year is we launched the Hawaii's first statewide voluntary local review. And this is really to actually gauge process. It's a benchmark report, a 2020 benchmark report to inform decision making, including on Hawaii's economic recovery through the Aloha Plus Challenge. And so this was quite comprehensive. It actually, we're joining cities from LA and New York and Bristol and Helsinki and others around the world that have reported on their progress. And this was actually produced in collaboration with other partners. And I have to apologize for our COVID puppy in the background. He desperately wants to contribute to this panel. But I might take that as a cue to hand the mic over to, back over to you, McKenna, and just note that the voluntary local review, I do encourage folks to look at that. It does spotlight where we are on our 100% clean energy commitment, as well as the other commitments that we have. One thing I do want to note before I hand over the mic, going back to Nainoa's point about youth and education. McKenna, you and I grew up in Kailua. When you grow up in an island community, our kids that live here have an inherent understanding about systems, knowing that what happens in your upper watershed affects your coral reef and the communities in between. And therefore, the youth in Hawaii are best prepared to lead, I think, the rest of the world in looking for a more sustainable, green, and resilient future. And this is something that we don't have to teach them top down. We simply have to provide the policy, the framework, and the platform for their voices to be heard. So thank you for that, and I'll hand it back over to you, McKenna. Mahalo.
Thank you, Celeste. Thank you so much for that presentation, and also the showing Nainoa's video that really helps to understand the importance of the Local 2030 Hub and Hawaii's role in that. I will pass it over to you, Anu, next. For the sake of time, let's keep moving on.
Thank you very much, and aloha, everyone. And thank you, Celeste, for those that wonderful shout out for our Hawaii's youth. I really think that is where it's at. Also, just as Nainoa said, you know, it's just a matter of doing it. So I'll just present a little bit on what we are doing to just do it. So I'll share my screen here. Can everyone see it? Just say yes, because I can't actually see you when I've got my screen up.
Okay. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. So I'm Anu Hittel, and I staff the Hawaii Climate Change Mitigation and Adaptation Commission. And we are working on basically, these are the big buckets of issues in Hawaii: rising sea levels, rising temperatures, less but intense rain. So we were the first state to show our commitment to addressing these impacts and take climate action by embracing the Paris Agreement in law. And so that law is Act 32, Session Laws of Hawaii 2017. And it basically gave birth to the state's Climate Change Commission. So the commission is a high-level multi-jurisdictional effort, 20 members. It's co-chaired by the Department of Land and Natural Resources and the Office of Planning, and has legislators, county planning directors, and various directors and chairs of department heads at the state level. So maybe because I'm based at the DLNR, I liken my work to a water column, and the commission sort of, I imagine it works at the pelagic level, at the, you know, where the sun shines and the storms take place. And I sort of work at the benthic, or the deeper level, with many partners, and I'll just sort of introduce a little bit of what we do within those levels. We also have a Climate Ready Vista AmeriCorps cohort that helps us. They're placed in different offices, different departments. And we help to administer and fund and expand the capacity of these departments specifically for climate change and equity work. So let me take you on a dive. And so here's, you know, the commission sort of at the pelagic level issues these statements, big broad frameworks on climate mitigation, where the priority is ground transportation emissions reduction, on adaptation, where priority is sea level rise and related impacts, and equity, and so on. And this latest one, which was issued in July 2021, basically issuing guidance to all Hawaii state and county governments on how to translate our robust climate policy framework into decision-making and investments, basically to address our current climate emergency. So we also have, you know, the Commission's mission statement, which is basically to promote ambitious, climate-neutral, culturally responsive strategies for climate adaptation and mitigation in a manner that is clean, equitable, and resilient. And then we operationalize this in the Climate Ready Hawaii initiative, basically taking these frameworks from that pelagic level and then bringing it down to the benthic level. Basically to the real nitty-gritty of how do you implement this? How do we do it? And so this is just a smattering of those pieces that are floating around at the benthic level. We work on aspects on resilience, sequestration, social and climate vulnerability framework for the state. Many of these things are things that are counterparts at the county level have been already doing, and are we're working and collaborating with them on this as well, on many of these pieces. Not to say necessarily, Matt, that you are, you know, just swimming around at the benthic level with me, but you know, that is we sort of dive up and down, and we work on those levels together. On the mitigation side, the Commission's working on its priority to reduce emissions from ground transportation, looking at electrifying the state government's fleet, to reducing vehicle miles traveled, and to building multimodal mobility hubs. Then on the adaptation side, we just have, we aim to sort of support departments and agencies, help maintain the best available information down at the Hawaii level, as well as global, provide guidance to counties for planning and permitting, and doing several of these other, several other projects, which I'm not going to go into all those pieces right now. Just as part of that support, some of the products that we have are things like sea level rise guidance tools for permitting at the parcel level. We've engaged all our different departments, really going down to the nitty gritty, just how do you actually take those high level recommendations and translate them into permitting at that level. And then that goes into government operations. So we've done things like that. And then we're also working, because we're looking at not just, as McKenna mentioned, we're looking at not just zero, but negative zero. So the race to sub-zero is what we in Hawaii are looking at. We're emphasizing nature-based resilience solutions for Hawaii and for the world. So this will help us go beyond that zero emissions future to a sub-zero future, because we're looking at targeting to sequester more than we can emit as quickly as practicable, but no later than 2045. And to do this, we need to capture emissions through natural and working lands and directly from the air. So the State Climate Commission also emphasizes that nature-based solutions, green infrastructure, and carbon-smart practices must be prioritized for climate-ready Hawaii. So we've sort of pulled together a baseline of ongoing activities and looking at the next steps for such a framework. We also do, obviously, things like webinars and so on, like this one, and sponsoring like our keynote, Michael Mann, who's coming next week to the Hawaii Book and Music Festival. And we had our own little Sea Level Rise campaign with our very own Kuloa Iki, a native duck that tells you about sea level rise and so on. So just going back now up to whoops, I don't want it to start playing. We don't want to start singing the Kuloa Iki song together, although it is pretty cute. So if you have a chance, check it out. So just going back to our pelagic level again, what are we doing? Where are the coalitions? As a small state, we really amplify the work we do by joining coalitions, both at home and abroad. And so there are two primary coalitions we've been working through, and that is, one is the, I should say, first, so let me just back up here. Before I get into the coalitions, one of the things that we have done at the state level is that we've led the world in being the first to commit to 100% clean, renewable energy goal. And then this year, Hawaii declared a climate emergency by resolution. And so these are the kinds of things that we input into through our coalitions as well. And this plays out with the US Climate Alliance, which is a 25-state alliance with their governor's offices to push for climate action. And then we work with the federal government's executive branch through this coalition as well. And then the alliance, I should also mention, is it represents 55% of the US population and $11.7 trillion in its economy. So it's an economy larger than all countries except the US and China. At the international level, we're also part of the Under 2 Coalition, about 200 local governments around the world committed to climate action. And then we are also working at the international level on the world stage with the IUCN and the World Conservation Congress, where Hawaii played a central role in establishing a Climate Crisis Commission. So now we head off to COP26 and as part of a subnational delegation of governors and state officials to do what we do well, which is raise ambition from Hawaii. And this is a picture from COP25, which is now 2 years ago. So here we are with a delegation of subnationals of other states and governors' staff. Last week, we had our kickoff for COP26 with our keynote speaker, Dr. Kim Cobb, and Governor Ige in his address said, we have embraced these big ambitions because we know that big ambition leads to big action. So Hawaii is all in to address the climate crisis. That is the message we will be taking to COP26. So that's my business card, and encourage everyone to sort of keep posted on our mailing list and social media, and I will turn it over to you, McKenna.
Thank you, Anu. That was really great overview of the actions of the commission and also the ways that I liked your pelagic and benthic analogy. So, and also the ways you push it forward more on the ground in implementation. So thanks so much. Matt, let's go over to you.
Sure. Thank you, McKenna. Aloha, everyone. And thank you to Celeste and Anu. Really appreciate that grounding to the message that Uncle Nainoa was able to reaffirm and has been reminding us over the last 10 years. And frankly, getting to these commitments and these goals and having these mantras or this sail plan really is essential, because it really brings us back together. We have a focal point to remind ourselves of the work that we're embarking on. It's very easy to sometimes get distracted or chase a wave or get in the muck down in the benthic level with Anu. But I don't have my full-on water world gills yet, so I definitely need to breach the surface to come up for air, and opportunities to reconnect with colleagues and community is just what I need to get fueled back up to then dive back in. But what I hope to add to the discussion today is to share back out how we greatly benefit from the partnerships and the coalitions and the attention and support from the global networks, along with what the state is able to provide in terms of technical support and resources, so that we can help bring that action down to the ground. And I would like to share one example of one of the many things that are needed within climate action that also shows the benefit of developing programs and partnerships to support and facilitate that kind of change. And that is in the building sector. Just want to share out that obviously buildings and the energy that we use in them are significant sources of our local greenhouse gas pollution. And if we are serious about climate action, then buildings do need to be part of the solution. So, a lot building from, whether it's the Aloha Plus Challenge or the Sustainable Development Goals, how do we bring that information down locally and find the messages within those broad themes to help it resonate, and then help us define actions or strategies or partnerships to really get at those goals and aspirations. And community has been doing this for a long time here locally, but certainly within the last 5 years, since the voters of Oahu elected to establish the Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency, and have been active participants in that visioning process ever since. And some of those outputs include the Oahu Resilience Strategy, which has helped shape sort of the sail plan or course of action for our office in particular, and then also the community-driven science-based climate action plan that I'm also pleased to say that we benefited from Dr. McKenna Kaufman's support and all the UH resources in making sure that we're honest about the numbers, because this stuff is not easy. And there's a lot of things that require a lot of work and course correction over time. So how do we focus our efforts in the near term with that long-term horizon top of mind? And then making sure that we are transparent and delivering that information, the progress or sometimes the lack thereof, through our own annual sustainability report. Because I think we all know, and there's different ways to say it, but what gets measured gets done. And we want to make sure that we are clear and open about a whole variety of measures and indicators, but things that we've actually already committed to within existing plans, and surface those and keep them top of mind for community. And we're excited to be able to provide this out annually every year around Earth Day. But focusing back to climate action in particular, we heard from Anu and sort of the broader perspective of the state's commission, both eliminating greenhouse gas pollution, but also preparing communities for the changes that we're seeing. We had a law that passed at the end of last year that reaffirmed our commitment to the Paris Climate Agreement by ensuring that we are establishing these near-term action plans so that we can really target our resources and attention, and hopefully over time drive down emissions, because we know that we don't need to export billions of dollars from our local economy to pretty precarious situations all around the globe to bring in that fossil fuel resource that's just obligating us to think about climate change and adaptation into the future. So greatly appreciate Anu and the state and Celeste's network, and looking forward to some renewed participation and leadership from the United States as we all reconvene in early November. But very quickly, just wanted to provide that snapshot of what our missions look like here on Oahu. And through past commitments, if folks are familiar with the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative, across the state, we saw significant improvements across buildings and the electricity sector, recognizing that efficiency first, always, as much as you can, because there's a lot of stuff that just exists already, but also looking at the source of our electricity, and that's the grid discussions. But we've kind of plateaued over the last couple of years, and unfortunately, we've actually seen an uptick. It'll be interesting to see what kind of deviations 2020 will bring, but we all know that's kind of an anomaly with regards to the lack of activity at that point in time. But when you dive a little bit deeper, this is where we better understand the different kinds of sources, whether it's in transportation, looking at aviation, vehicle travel, or marine. And then within the electricity sector, this is where we really get to understand that about a third of our emissions come from the buildings that we live in, the buildings that we work in. And again, this raises the recognition that we need to think both and in terms of efficiency and the source of that electricity. And fortunately, we continue to see really marked improvements across our grid. And that's both in some of the larger grid scale projects, but primarily driven by rooftop solar. And that's certainly an equity discussion moving forward, where those that can have tapped into that resource and some of those rebates and incentives. So how do we make sure that all are carried forward in this transition? Because ensuring that we have less demand also ensures that we have fewer land use tensions and discussions out in community. So we can't lose sight of the role that efficiency plays. And at the city, we want to make sure that we're walking the talk as well. This doesn't really highlight or show too much, but I'm very excited to share, probably in the 2021 to 2022 bar chart, really impressive improvements and reinvestments into our own physical plant in terms of an energy savings performance contract that we currently have underway. Also, I'd be remiss if I didn't say Happy Energy Efficiency Day to all of you. The first Wednesday of every October is Energy Efficiency Day, and Mayor proclaimed that, and City Council reaffirmed it by putting the pressure on us to make sure we do the work of implementing our climate action plan. Very quickly, we're not going to go into this, but just to remind ourselves that climate action is not just about buildings and electricity. Climate action is about how we move around community, how healthy and mobile we can be, how we manage our waste, whether it's solid waste or wastewater. But certainly buildings and electricity are important. But it's a good recognition that climate action is really about people actions and quality of life, but also it happens to just be good business. And when we launched the Climate Action Plan on Earth Day, Mayor reminded all of us that plans are all well and good, but really it's about what you do moving forward in the days and weeks ahead, and about driving action and execution. I'm pleased to share very quickly with you that the city is advancing climate action across a whole variety of sectors, looking at our own transportation services, whether it's the bus or our city fleet, looking at quality of life improvements in terms of complete streets resources island-wide, and then making sure that our transportation is more efficient and safe and prioritized as a means of mobility. And folks may have seen the King Street bus-only lane that popped up very quickly last year. But then also looking on the equity side in terms of in-town areas or dense developments around rail. We have a bigger priority to house people than to house vehicles. So we shouldn't be in the position of defining how much parking needs to be created. Let's let the market identify what it really wants to provide, so that the city's not in this odd position of forcing overbuilding an asset. And then quickly just wanted to come back and try to wrap up here in terms of looking at buildings in particular. You know, I mentioned existing buildings and new buildings. We have a lot of things that exist already. We have a lot of things that will be built tomorrow and will be with us for the next 60 or more years. And both and need to be addressed. But we at the city are leading in terms of identifying our own energy and water usage in buildings. And we're embarking on this partnership program to develop that kind of facilitative resource on the community side. And it's that notion of benchmarking that I alluded to. So what exactly are we talking about? You know, I mentioned that new buildings are important, and City Council has, and they will continue to weigh in on how our building codes ensure that those future buildings are efficient and they help keep utility bills down and affordable in the long run. But the goal of building benchmarking is really about shining a light on energy and water use in existing buildings. So energy benchmarking is a pretty simple concept. We can't manage what we don't measure. And you know, none of us would go out and buy a car if we didn't know its fuel efficiency. It might not immediately influence what we're doing, but we're probably kind of interested. But also, you know, like we wouldn't buy an appliance with some sense of what it costs to run for the full length of a year. But we don't typically know the same for buildings before we buy, lease, or rent a unit within them. And the buildings are what we spend most of our time and money on. So benchmarking enables tenants, buyers, users to get to know the building before engaging in that contract. And this helps the market better understand the resources that may be needed to improve efficiency and help lower bills. So again, with about a third of our emissions coming from electricity used to power our homes and businesses, if we are serious about climate action, we need to ensure that buildings are part of that solution. And through benchmarking, we can lower operating expenses, drive economic activity, and take climate action. Don't want to belabor this, but it's really about empowering with information. And whether it's the Aloha Plus or our annual sustainability report, just that transparency and the provision of that information can get people asking questions, can get people more interested in that information, and then drive and spur interest in acting upon that information. And that's really what it's all about, so that even we at the city can think about programs to bring more resources to support those that maybe don't have the means to think about reinvesting in their own facilities. And it's by no means a new idea. You know, some 30 cities or states are working on this, and we hope to be working with City Council in the coming months. And as I mentioned, the city is benchmarking our own facilities as obligated by a law that passed, but frankly, it's just good practice. And there are a lot of local leaders that have been doing this for a long time. One, because it helps them think about their own operations and drive their own efficiencies, but also it's a competitive advantage when you think about sort of your image and this recognition that you can drive action. And as we conclude here, I don't want to belabor this too much, but you know, across jurisdictions that have implemented and facilitated benchmarking as a concept, yes, climate action can be a primary focus for it, but really you start to accrue and realize so many other significant and important benefits, whether it's just your decline in energy consumption, savings on the bills, but also opportunities for job training and job growth. So to wrap up here, you know, the community benefits are quite wide. What benchmarking as a program doesn't obligate is it doesn't require anyone to install anything. It doesn't force expensive upgrades. It's really about having access to information so that we can be more informed about what we do moving forward. And I think we've all seen this, especially through all the challenges economically and health through the COVID pandemic, and the kinds of services that are really buoying small businesses and homeowners through this economic crisis, whether it's Hawai'i Energy providing rebates or full-on grants to improve operations within a small business to help them mitigate and buffer the impacts that they've had. Hawaiian Electric, our utility, thinking about demand response and being more nimble in how we distribute the resource of electricity around the island. And then just thinking about how the federal government has now put so much money and resource into keeping people afloat. So how do we just make sure that we're doing better moving forward in new and existing buildings. So I know that was a very specific example, but I hope that sort of tied a thread between these mantras and these motivations and these essential commitments across the world, down to the state and across the counties, and just providing you all that we're committed to doing that work, but it takes a lot of work. Sometimes it's policy, sometimes it's network, sometimes it's market or spending tools. And with that, I'll hand it back to McKenna, and looking forward to connecting with all of you.
Thanks, Matt. Happy Energy Efficiency Day. It's a good reminder. I know we had wanted to go from global to local and sort of back again. And before we do that, I'll just remind people to put your questions into the Q&A of the Zoom so we can start to go through them. And we've had some fielded already, but we'll, anyways, take this moment to do that. And Anu, you talked a little bit about the delegation from the state that's going to COP26 next month. We had mentioned you might want to elaborate on that a little bit in terms of sort of what is the role of the state there, and sort of what are your expectations in terms of the delegation's kind of hopes for change?
Yeah, thanks, McKenna. So governor is scheduled to lead a state delegation, and there's also more of our Hawaii Ohana going as well, others from the university and so on. So I think our larger goals are really to share and learn, but also to drive up and raise that ambition, right? So this is the first year that the US has, it's rejoined after 4-year lapse. It's rejoined the Paris Agreement. And so having the state, having subnational actors there, really shows that this work has been carried on at the local level, at the state level, even when the federal government was AWOL on climate and in the last 4 years. So I think it's really to show that this is where the action is, and that we want to be a partner with the national government, not, as they put it at these COPs, we're usually the side event is what they call us. So, we're not the side event. The message is we're the main event, actually. So I think that is what we're really trying to push and push hard. So, yeah.
Thanks, Anu. Celeste, can I ask you to comment on sort of the upcoming COP26 from a nonprofit perspective, and also with your work with the Islands Partnership?
Yeah, thanks, McKenna. We will be there as a hybrid part virtual and some of our team in person, but what we're really doing is furthering the commitment that Special Envoy for Climate Change, Kerry, made at the Climate Summit, and will be announcing new island members that are joining the local 2030 Islands Network. We'll also be looking at launching the communities of practice that the NREL has launched. Members have indicated early interest in looking at community resilience and really support in getting to those net zero pathways. We're also previewing the work that we're doing with the Data and Dashboard Communities of Practice group. And this is really the technical assistance that actually follows when island economies identify through this peer-to-peer, first of its kind peer-to-peer network focused on SDG implementation, what the priorities might be. So certainly some of the things that we're experiencing in Hawaii, electrification of transportation, looking at grid vulnerability. These are things that have actually come up from other island communities, but also opportunities looking at projects at the water, energy, food nexus. And what's really remarkable is how Hawaii can actually be helping to support this in that peer-to-peer forum with the work that Matt and Anu and others are leading, but also our utility as well as other public and private sector partners. So at the COP, we'll be working on that, expanding new memberships, and we've also recently launched an MOU with Esri, which is supporting our dashboard. So really looking at the importance of data. Further, the collaboration that we have underway with NOAA, looking at the available science that we have in countries that might have less capacity. So we're really excited about that. And I should say, what's pretty remarkable, to Ani's point, we're not the side event, but islands are not the side event. And I think for too long, islands have been viewed in the climate negotiating context as victims of this already occurring impacts of climate change. And we have decades-long trajectory of showing that islands are actually leaders in this space. You know, we had the Micronesia Challenge that recently celebrated its 20-year anniversary. And those were leaders that said, regardless of what happens in this international arena or not, island leaders are committing to steward their land and natural resources. And that Micronesia Challenge inspired the Caribbean Challenge. And that's ultimately what inspired the Aloha Plus Challenge. So part of the idea of the Local 2030 Islands Network is really showcasing islands as leaders. And further, the network allows for a new kind of diplomacy to emerge. We heard from colleagues on the panel that, you know, very often local governments are keeping the flame going during shifts in our federal government. And this is really the case that we're seeing this increase in leadership and solutions and ideas coming from our counties, our cities, our mayors, our states. And so with the Local 2030 Islands Network, specifically looking at island economies, it allows for Hawaii, for example, and Guam and Puerto Rico to have a seat at the table with Ireland and Seychelles and Cape Verde and other islands from around the world. So that's really what we're hoping to bring, the message at COP. And really, if you want to solve the Sustainable Development Goals, you need to think like an islander, because we're trying to figure out how to achieve these really highly ambitious goals when we're often dealing with finite resources. And the solution will often be in between these goals, with climate change being the challenge of our time. So we're excited that these conversations will yield concrete solutions and collaboration.
Thanks, Celeste. Thank you, Anu. So we've had a lot of questions come in, so I want to turn right to the Q&A before we run out of time. And Celeste, this one is for you. When was the Aloha Plus Challenge established, and was there a 2020 goal? How much did they achieve in the 2020 goal compared to where we are now in 2021? And I think that, you know, the heart of this question is really around how are you doing in terms of measuring progress?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, you don't know where you're going unless you know where you come from. So essentially, I would encourage folks to look at the voluntary local review, the benchmark report, because it does show where we're doing well and where we need to improve. You know, for example, on clean energy, I think it shows that we're actually on track. But if you look at our marine management and the goal to steward 30% of our nearshore marine area by 2030, we're only 8% of the way there. And so the benchmark report allows us to look at that and say, have we been investing the money and resources where we should be? What is working well? What needs to be tweaked? With regards to the origin story of the Aloha Plus Challenge, a lot of it was the leaders coming around the Smart Sustainable Communities goal that was announced at the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation meeting in 2011. And energy was actually an early mover in that. So, you know, often when you look at these sustainability goals in other communities, including the United States and our approach going into the Rio Plus 20 or the UN Conference on Sustainable Development that I was involved in when I was in the White House, is what was the first goal that the community identified. In this case, energy was really that. And then when you look at energy, you're looking at all of the other factors that you need to take into consideration. A lot of those that I see being addressed in the chat, having a doubling local food goal, right? Having your education and workforce goal. So that was the origin story. I think the benchmark report shows how we're doing against those goals, where there are gaps and where we need a little bit more attention.
Thanks, Celeste. Matt, I'm going to field this question to you. It's, what are the good or effective incentive-based programs or policies in Hawaii that help people conserve or reduce waste or pollute less?
Incentive-based. Well, when I heard waste, not sure if that's sort of a solid waste, but in terms of not being wasteful, there are ways to get rebates on both energy use or water use directly from Hawaii Energy, but also even our Board of Water Supply and our Department of Facility Maintenance, they have rebate programs for water barrels. So these are, you know, ways that you can utilize and capture and benefit from the rain that falls right at your own property to make sure you can use that for your needs. You know, a lot of other private businesses also have support, whether it's about using your own cup, or making sure that you're not sort of taking on unnecessary plastic waste. Certainly, sometimes there's a little bit of a nudge from government, and we should all be very proud of the disposable foodware ordinance that passed last year and took effect at the start of this year and going into phase 2 next year, just to make sure that we just don't have that kind of stuff in the system. You know, one way to make sure we're not using it is to, what are the 3 R's? Reduce, reuse, recycle. So certainly reducing first comes in that triad, and making sure that we're reusing as best can. And something like a water barrel, a rain barrel is a perfect example of capturing it and then reusing it. So that's kind of a scattershot of a response. But for anyone that is interested, I strongly recommend visiting the Hawaii Energy website, hawaiienergy.com. This is a public benefit for all of us that comes from the thing that we're trying to address, which is fossil fuel sourced greenhouse gas pollution.
Thanks, Matt. I'm going to collapse a few questions for you, Anu. There are a number of questions in the chat, a couple which you've already answered in regards to the state greenhouse gas inventory and sort of metrics, you know, thinking about it moving forward. The last measurement was in 2017, as well as what sort of counts as we're making those measurements. So there's a couple of comments and questions in regards to biofuels being attributed as a renewable source of energy, and whether that, you know, really should be classified as such. I'll turn that to you, Anu.
I was going to send you something in the chat saying, don't give me that question. But since you have, I'm just going to take sort of a wishy-washy attempt at answering it. So the greenhouse gas inventory, I mean, it's from 2017. Normally we have like a 2-year data lag, right? So we're only 2 years behind that 2-year data lag, I would say. So we're catching up, okay? I mean, we are playing catch up, and I've answered that question a couple times in the chat. So yeah, we've had some backlog, and the inventories are coming, you know, fast and furious now. So we will be caught up. I think the categories in the inventory are you know, they're established under law and so on. And so I haven't really been very close to like which categories are where and why, but you know, I do know that there are some quirks in there. And, you know, for example, one of the questions, I'm going to be very openly deflective here and say that I don't know about biofuels, but I know that, you know, one question that people have often is about aviation. And, you know, we do reveal it in the inventory, but it's not counted as part of what we're trying to reduce. So, you know, there's some quirks in there. Again, it's all about, to some degree, it is about how you account for these things, how you measure these things. We're always, you know, we're looking to refine that and to work with best practices across the nation and the world. So that's one of the reasons that our collaborations with the Under 2 Coalition and with the larger global community is so important. How was that for sort of answering a non-answer answer?
It was good. That was a non-answer answer. Matt, I'm going to give you the last question. The question is, I heard that the permitting process for properties in Hawaii takes many years for new construction and some renovations to be approved. Will this also slow down the implementation of the energy efficient technology that would otherwise put us on track for our goals? Do we need more policy adaptation when it comes to construction?
We need more efficient systems, frankly, and very encouraged with the mayor taking to heart the audit that was conducted of the Department of Planning and Permitting that came out last year, and the system improvements. I mean, so much of it can be streamlined and efficient or made more efficient, but taking the time to do that also takes time. So the group actually is already under contract. They've sliced and diced, and they're going to do a complete overhaul of how things come in and get processed to make sure that things are being done in a more efficient manner. And even with that system, sometimes you need additional guidance. And there was an ordinance that was signed into law last year that helps to streamline clean energy projects, including rooftop PV and rooftop battery, as well as EV chargers within structures. So it's definitely both and. We can't lose sight of how do we look at our mechanisms for enforcement, look at our mechanisms for ordinance to drive the policy discussion, but we also need to make sure that we're investing in the people and in the systems, and that is top of mind for the administration. It's something that we're also additionally looking at in terms of ARPA deployments, because it's about leapfrogging us and springboarding us into this transition that is needed to make sure that we can thrive moving forward.
Well, thank you. We've come to the end of time. Thank you so much, Matt, Anu, and Celeste, for your presentations and comments. I see Roger has come on screen, so I'm going to pass this over to Roger Jelinek, who is the organizer of the Hawaii Book and Music Festival.
Aloha, McKenna. Thank you. Thank you very much, all of you. That was a remarkably efficient discussion, and it's exactly what I was hoping for. So I really appreciate your taking the trouble to do it so well. Mahalo, and we'll do it again next year. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha.